You might recognize this classic comic from the video I did about comic book adaptations of Disney live-action films. In today's video, we'll take a look at comic book adaptations of Disney animated features. And of course, that means we're going to start right at the beginning with Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Now, this comic book features the Sunday comic adaptation of Walt Disney's first animated feature, which ran in Sunday newspapers starting in late 1937 in conjunction with the original release of the film. That beautiful adaptation was drawn in sort of an illustrative style, with pencils by the great Hank Porter, inks by Bob Grant, and it was written by Merrill Demaris, who was a story artist on the film itself. Comic books had not really come into fashion in 1937, so it wasn't until 1944 that this comic version was issued as a comic book. And I really love this cover. It's done in sort of a fairy tale illustrative style, but also incorporated some 1940s feeling dancing by Snow White and Dopey. They look like they're jitterbugging. So in the next reprint, which was in 1952, it was replaced with a more traditional on-model approach. And this comic book was published a great many times over the years, usually in conjunction with a reissue of the film to theaters. And if we take a look at the art, it's really quite beautiful. Done in, as I said, an illustrative style, sort of a really almost wood engraved look. Lots of shading. Just beautiful. So no wonder it's been republished so many times over the years. Walt's next animated feature was, of course, Pinocchio, and that too had a Sunday comic strip adaptation, as did all the features. And this too was beautifully done. But that Sunday comic adaptation was never republished in its own comic book form. It wasn't until 1945 that a comic book adaptation in its own right was published, and it was drawn by the great Walt Kelly, who of course had been a Disney animator and worked on Pinocchio, and he was doing a great deal of work for comic books in those days. And the Pinocchio comic book really does have a naughty history, naughty as in pine, like Pinocchio's made of pine. Well, you get it. Anyhow, because in 1949, another comic book adaptation, of an inferior one, I might say, was published. But after that, whenever there was a Pinocchio comic book republication, it was the Walt Kelly version. And that was republished in 1954, 1963, 1971, 1979, 1982, which is this edition here, and then again in 1990. And we can take a look here and see this great adaptation by one of the greatest comic artists that there has ever been. And I'm sure most of you know that Walt Kelly's great masterpiece was the Pogo comic strip, which I always consider done in a great Disney style. And Walt Kelly's great masterpiece, Pogo, is being republished in these wonderful hardcover editions, which I highly recommend. And you can get this hopefully at your independent bookseller. But if you would like to purchase this at Amazon, please use the link in the story notes, because that will help support this YouTube channel. To get back to the Pinocchio comic book, it's so beautifully done, which is no surprise because Walt Kelly probably never produced a bad drawing in his life. As with a lot of these adaptations, there were some liberties taken. I think that's especially true for Pinocchio because the story is so complicated. So, for example, in the film, a beautiful white dove, probably representing the Blue Fairy, brings a note revealing where Geppetto is. And here it just kind of blows into Jiminy's face. And then the white dove arrives to give them a ride to the seashore. She arrives, grows to giant size so they can ride on her back. So there's some little touches like that throughout that are different than they are in the film. And some of it's very condensed, like the whole Monstro chase scene, which is an incredible action scene in the film. Just takes place in a few panels here. But at any rate, it's a great adaptation with that great Walt Kelly art. Cinderella, released in 1950, was one of the first to have a straight-to-comic book adaptation concurrent with the release of the film. This is the 1982 version again, and it was also republished in 1957 and 1965. I've always really loved the cover. The original was even more elaborate than this one, but this is a scene that's not really seen in the film, of course. Combines Cinderella wearing the dress that the mice have made for her, the mice and the birds, and here we see that happening at once. That's very comic book, isn't it, to kind of conflate that into one happening for the cover. But it's a beautiful and very faithful adaptation, and it's drawn by Dan Gormley in a beautiful style, I think. Very faithful to the original film, and all kinds of beautiful art. Here's the ball. Here's Cinderella running away from the ball at midnight, and the happy ending. In 1951, of course, Alice in Wonderland was released, and so was this comic book. This is not a republication, it's the original from 1951. It has this great wraparound cover. And the art came from Riley Thompson, a Disney animation veteran. He did the pencils. Inking is done by Bob Grant. A great adaptation with all these great characters that you see in the film. Here's the croquet game. Here is the Cheshire Cat. And then the Mad Tea Party. One interesting thing to note, and we do see this in some merchandise and publications and so forth associated with Alice in Wonderland, is that the original model of Alice's cat, Dinah, looks a lot like Figaro from Pinocchio. And that was changed in the film to a brown kitten with big blue eyes, and that seems to have been done almost at the very last moment. So again, in some of the merchandise, you will see that more Figaro-like model. And obviously they decided that was too close to Figaro, so it needed to be changed. Famously, Alice in Wonderland did not do well at the box office and therefore was not released in theaters, that is, until 1974. And at that time, the comic book was published as part of Walt Disney Comics Digest. And here it is in all its glory, just in digest sized. So that's a lot of fun, and I love that fun cover. Next we have Peter Pan, released in 1953, and this is not a republication. Again, this is the original version from 1953. A great drawing of Captain Hook's ship on the back. And this cover is by Bob Grant. His name's already come up, and small wonder because he is a Disney Comics great. But the interior is by the legendary Al Hubbard, and this is very important because from this point on, Al Hubbard was the premier artist behind the Disney animated features adaptations for comics. So he becomes very, very important at this point. Just some great art as usual. And he had an interesting style. It's very distinctive, sort of a feathery, sketchy look that I think really works beautifully for these sort of storybook type adaptations. Let's take a look at The Flight to London, The Mermaids, Skull Rock. So obviously there are more of these comic book adaptations of Disney animated features. We will take a look at more of them in another video, and again we'll be seeing more of Al Hubbard's art. And just a reminder that if you've liked what you've seen, please take a moment to like this video. And if you have a favorite Disney comic book adaptation or any kind of Disney comic book, please let me know in the comments. And of course, as always, please remember to subscribe. You don't want to miss any of the new videos or any of the surprises that are coming up here on Toglywood TV. Please be with us next time when we'll take a video visit to some famous New York addresses, such as Eastland Academy, 148 Bonnie Meadow Road in New Rochelle, 623 East 68th Street in New York City, and Stately Wayne Manor in Gotham City. Oh, wait a minute. Gotham City isn't New York. Oh well, close enough.